right here. All the smaller branches would come off, and those were pretty much deer browsed anyway, and because those were not viable branches. But all of these would stay up, and the key is you would create essentially a non-combustible zone. You can kind of see the mowing that has started around here. They're not certainly done with this because this would be much more cleaned up. And you would see those large branches at the end of this treatment. But the non-combustible zone would go out 6 feet in a radius from the outside of the crown of that. Did I say it right? Crown of that limb. So important branches, and sometimes the branches are holding up the tree. So if you want to take that big branch out, you've now again compromised the health of that tree. So we have a workaround for these large branches because they're so important to both the structure integrity as well as the health of the tree, without compromising fire safety. So in the way we figured we could do that is if a fire were to come along on the surface and it reached mowed or really no material within 6 feet of that, and all of the dead material is gone, there's a really good chance that that's not going to contribute too much to the intensity of the fire. On the right-hand side, there's a shorter tree, shorter than 24 feet in height. So if you were to remove up to 8, if it's say 16 feet tall, and you were to remove the branches up to 8 feet in height, you've reduced the photosynthesis area by a significant amount. So we said in shorter trees to apply those rules for the bottom third of the tree until it reaches 24 feet, and then you reach your 8 foot height. Questions? Okay. All right. So here are some other examples. On the left, these are places. These are shorter trees that have not yet been treated, and so that's the example of where you want to remove the bottom third of the branches according to those diagrams and decision rules, and then again to mow the grass under the canopies of the trees. Right. So those look pretty manageable, but often in the first time for folks who have been implementing first-time fuel management plans, it's tough. The picture on the left is just an impenetrable thicket of oak branches and some shrubs underneath and dead material, and so I don't want to paint the picture that it's always easy. So in this case, you would look for the things that are important to keep. There may be young oak trees in there, so you don't want to cut them down. You do your reconnaissance first, look for what you want to keep, and then take out all the dead material, and then start to look for what is appropriate to remove according to the guidelines. So you would thin and then prune after reconnaissance. And on the right-hand side, the picture shows a tree that is drooping down right next to a house. And so there's some challenges even after houses that are built where maybe they didn't implement the plan or have not yet caught one. Okay. All right, so this impenetrable thicket idea kind of leads right into an oak shrub woodland management standard. The theme here is this is oak woodlands with a very well-developed understory with lots of bushes underneath it, and so there's some. I would say most pre-settlement times this would be a rare thing to encounter, because the oak woodlands usually were burned off so much more frequently, or there was other disturbance. So this is kind of an unusual thing due to fire suppression. And the result of this is massive torching. So that the trees will actually, because of the shrubs underneath and the dead material that's been accumulated under, they will all torch, and it will very likely kill all the trees. And it will have a much more dire circumstance than even after treatment. So as far as a health of an ecosystem, this is pretty bad. And oftentimes we'll have stand replacing fires and the trees will resprout, but it'll take decades for them to do that. Whereas if you were able to take the understory underway, then it would be much less damaging to the trees that you like. So the treatments on this go out for 100 feet from the structure, and you would apply the pruning standards for the trees if the branches are too low, but we really focus on removal of the shrubs underneath, and to remove those ladder trees. On the left, there's an example of where the shrubs are completely continuous and the branches are all the way down to the ground, and there's no way that the fire, in addition from the grasslands, would not communicate and burn the top of the trees. Whereas on the right, you've pretty much made those trees not combustible for a ground fire. So just by removing the understory fuels, you've changed the behavior of the fire and increased the protection of the oak woodlands that you've got. All right. So we've got some diagrams in the standards, not only for the pruning, but also for spacing between shrubs and trees. So you've got at least a 6-foot minimum of shrubs from below the canopy of the trees. So we've got, in this case, it's a good example of where you've got shrubs and manzanitas that are not touching the base of the tree, and the tree has been pruned up. So this is a way that you can still have some shrubs, but not close to the tree canopy, so that you're going to protect that tree. All right, so here's some examples of places that have yet to be treated. On the left, this is really important to treat the edge. And that's because if a fire were to start out in the grass and it were to, as in the previous picture, get into the shrubs and burn up the canopy, all you have to do actually is treat the first 10 to 20 feet of the oak canopy in that circumstance. And a fire that goes into a grass may burn into the oak woodland. And the oak woodlands actually reduce the wind speed, and so it's much less likely to torch just from that edge, from treating this edge. So it's most important to treat the edges of the oak woodlands if you have an option. Right. So you've seen some pictures and some diagrams and maybe even guidelines from the Sierras about how your tree canopies can't touch. And they have to have 10 feet or 20 feet from each tree canopies. That was meant for conifers. It was not meant for oak woodlands. So the main message here in big bold letters, don't do it. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, it isn't, oak trees, unless you have an understory under it, are not prone to torching. So why would you take drastic measures which will hurt the oak woodlands if it doesn't improve the fire behavior? If you remove the oak canopy and thin it, you actually are producing more sunlight for the shrubs to grow. So you've got a maintenance issue. You've got lots more shrubs, and it's the shrubs that are going to cause the fire problems. So why would you want to improve more growing conditions for the shrubs underneath? So it just hope you take away, don't thin your tree canopies. So the next standard and the type of standard is for oak woodlands. And this is a place where oftentimes the canopies are closed. It's really shady. And this is often the result of the work that you did in the oak shrub woodlands. So you remove the shrubs, and now you've got an oak woodland. And it's really common on the preserve. The good news is, of all of the vegetation types we see on the preserve, this is the one that has the most benign fire behavior. The flame lengths are really 2 feet, even without treatment, if you mow your grass. And it spreads very, very slowly. It's what you want for a vegetation type next to your house. And the only issue is, you know, your leaf litter can't be too deep. So this treatment also goes out for 150 feet. And again, the main message is keep your shrubs short underneath the oak woodlands. If there is grass next to a home, you need to mow it, and those grass underneath the canopies. You want to make sure your shrubs are less than 2.5 feet height, and typically that's every 3 to 5 years as a maintenance regime. And if you always do have choices as to which shrubs to remove. The standards have a good list of ones that are typically better than others to retain, and so look for those. Remove the ones that are most flammable.
Carol, before we move off that slide,
Yeah.
for a minute, can I just offer another area where we see some confusion from time to time, but it's really helpful to understand. So in this picture, you can see this is probably that 30-foot mow zone from around the house where you really want to come down to 4-inch or so grass. If you had some fern in here, that would be fine. Some of those really moisture plants, right? But this is your most aggressively managed defensible space. And then behind it, you're going to see from that 30-foot out to 150-foot, there's a higher level of understory. But in this case, you can see it's very green. It's probably fern and low-growing coffeeberry and some of those very moist fuel types. An error that we often see, and it's usually right when you first buy the house or you're trying to sell the house and the insurance company is saying, do whatever you can, is they'll go in and clear way deep into the forest back here. They'll actually take all of that very stable, very moist native vegetation out. And what you typically get back is French broom or woody weeds. And it turns what had been a very manageable, every 3-year maybe maintenance and very highly biodiverse area into a very high maintenance, less aesthetically pleasing, way less biodiverse kind of nightmare. And if you can imagine, the house is here, but if you go out 200 feet all the way around the house, it's a very large, potentially very large management zone you're creating. So I just wanted to...
Thank you, and that was why this image was included, is because it had both of those concepts. It had the grass mowing nearby, but this was really a good example. And if it can stay that way, it will be a good thing. Typically, it will grow back, be a little bit higher, but don't treat it every year. Treat it every 5 to 7 years. All right, so here's an example of how stable things can be even in a landscape zone. So this was planted about 11 years ago, and this was its result just last year. So you've got, it really didn't change much, and it's really, from a fire behavior point of view, pretty bomb-proof. So some good things can be easy to maintain.
Can I ask a quick question?
You bet.
So I don't see a lot of separation between masses of plants here in the right hand, but you're saying that's a good solution.
And that's
Talk a
because,
little bit about how important or not in this situation your view of this being successful and the spacing of the plant masses.
thank you. So I looked at these. These are not woody plants. These are ferns and Douglas irises, and so they are not woody plants. Yes, sorry.
Those aren't ferns. So if we had groups of woody plants, but had Doug iris or ferns in between them, would that type of vegetation be enough separation between the masses of woody plants?
That's a good idea. Yes.
So we don't have to have bare land
Yes.
or grasslands. We can have low fuel, non-woody breaks between the larger masses of.
And we can have masses of plants, because that's...
So I just want to make sure everybody heard the questions. The question was whether or not you could have non-woody plants like ferns or Douglas iris in between woody plants. And my opinion is yes. And so the follow-up question was, so it doesn't have to be bare dirt? And the answer is yes. And then there was a follow-up question that I didn't quite hear.
You know, I was just kind of... I'm fine, I'm good,
Okay.
got it. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So we're pretty much done with trees for a while. Now we're going to talk about shrubs. The North Coastal scrub is a really diverse ecosystem, And it's especially rich on the preserve. And part of it is because it is old. It has had a chance to all mesh together. So it's a really cool thing, and that's why we value it. Young stands are mostly that coyote brush moving into grasslands, and so it doesn't have the diversity when it's young. So we're really, the thing that is especially important is the old stuff. And oftentimes this north coastal scrub will be the place that young oaks form, because it may eventually move into oak woodlands. So some of that is what we'll see too. But especially in the old north coastal scrub, it is because it is old. It has all this dead material in it. It can have up to 50% dead material in it. It burns like gangbusters, often with flame lengths 30, 40 feet in length. So it spreads really rapidly. So as far as the fire behavior goes, it's difficult next to a house. And so that's why the treatments are out for 200 feet, and that we're going to be looking at gaps. We're going to be trying to create gaps between one shrub mass and another. So we'll go into that gap sizing. You can have these clumps can be either big patches of brush and big patches in between, or small patches of brush and small patches between. You can have it actually can be two scales of granularity. So it works on both ways. And also, if you wanted to have smaller gaps and smaller patches of shrubs, the idea is to shorten the shrub height, because the flame length is actually very well related to the shrub height. So the shorter shrubs don't have as much flame length, and so you can have smaller gaps between the shrubs. So that's the principle behind the treatment. Okay, we've got these continuous shrubs, and then you've broken it up into gaps. And here's a success story. This parcel was actually at the edge of the Soberanas fire. The initial treatment on the right-hand side looked pretty dire, but there are a lot of coyote brush and different, they pick the species that they like, and in the gaps actually was the border for the Soberanas. So here's another example of where on the left, they picked to retain coffeeberry, because that was a plant that has really good, is pretty fire resistant, and so they kept that, and 5 years later, they still have the coyote brush coming in, but they still have the coffeeberry. So it's what we would say, okay, time to retreat. But, and as far as retreatment goes, in these patches, you can decide to keep the old patches and mow around it as before, or you could cut down the bushes that if it weren't a good retention one that you wanted to keep, you could cut down the older bushes and let the young bushes be the new grouping. So in maintenance, it's actually just as hard as the first time around. So in chaparral, it is closely tied to fire ecology, but also on the preserve, it's one of the most valued ecosystems here, because maritime chaparral is really rare in California. So we highly value it, but at the same time, it also burns very, very well. And so thus treatments also go out to 200 feet. In this case, also you have to select species to retain and retreat periodically. On the right-hand side, left-hand side of the yellow dot, that was treated mechanically along Chamicel Pass. And even though it looks continuous, all of that is fairly young and is not likely to burn with what's intensity on the right-hand side, which is filled with a whole lot of dead material. So the treatment is to, in this impenetrable growth, try to select the plants that are the bad actors. In other words, mostly chamise. In many cases, we've gone to place, say, take out the chamise, stand back and look what is left, and a lot of times that's good enough. And that's because chamise has the worst fire behavior characteristics. So you thin both the plants themselves, and in this case, you actually can remove the dead material and the volume of the, especially manzanita. So on the right-hand side, the bushes were actually pruned, so the volume of the plants were reduced in each bush, in addition to having the clumps between it. So the whole big area was thinned, and then each of the bushes was thinned as well. That's because it's chaparral is really hard to deal with. So the good news is a lot of these manzanitas and other plants sprout. And that's good because you want soil retention and reduce the erosion, slope stability, and all that good stuff. But the bad news is, you're going to have to retreat it because they sprout. So it's a good news, bad news circumstance.
Can you talk about that just a little, the retreatment? How come you're not looking at zone conversion? Why don't you either spray them or just rip them out and go to grassland, savanna with those? Because you're basically creating a false ecosystem. You have a bunch of stumps with a bunch of sprouts in here that is not easy to maintain. It's hard up here, but they're hard to maintain. And people don't like it. They don't like walking through these little stump patches.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
So the question was challenging the retreatment and trying to keep chaparral rather than just do a type conversion into grass. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I'm excluding the large island, large volume idea. People like that, and it's an ecosystem stuff. It's the scattered kind of every year or every 5-year trashing of the scrubs with the mowers that doesn't seem to lead to anything long-term productive. It seems like you either rip it out completely, you can go to native grassland, or you kind of in this battle with one plant.
So the question was regarding maintenance, and instead of converting it to grasslands, to have repeated mowing that would have this short manzanita scrub. And my first response, and it's everything site specific, but my first thought is that a lot of times the manzanita is there because grass won't grow very easily. So, and that's why. Oftentimes the soils are so depauperate, grass won't grow. So here's some other examples and ways of treatments. This on the left, the homeowner has pruned the material, especially down at the ground, because unfortunately this is near the non-combustible zone, so they had to really, and I don't think it's finished yet, really take the material out from the bottom of the branches. And the nice thing is that the bark is very beautiful, and you can see that. In the middle, they achieved the separation on a shrub by shrub on a very small granular level. And then on the right-hand side is an area where it's outside the tree canopy, so that they left the manzanita, which is in compliance with the fuel standards. So one of the things with manzanitas, and especially shrubs and chaparral, it's tricky because you don't really see it. It doesn't really look the same way. When this property was first built, it was just a mess of very complete, continuous manzanitas. And on the right-hand side, it looks like it hasn't had much separation. But in fact, when you go to the side, they actually have clumps between it. And the good news is that's because it provides very good screening. So the depth of the planting area provided the screening. And the circle on the left, you can't see the gap behind it, but there's a gap behind it, as shown by the picture in the bottom. And then in addition, from afar, the bushes look quite complete and dense, but in fact, the circle on the right shows that bush was in fact pruned from the bottom and much reduced in volume. Okay. So, do we have more questions? And I appreciate the questions all along the way, too. Yes?
So, I live on Care Driveway, which is outside of this area.
So the question was, outside of the preserve, will these standards potentially apply? And might it be better to cut the shrubs short? And then there was also a worry about complete loss of habitat type through more extreme cutting and more frequent cutting of the chaparral. So these standards can apply outside of the preserve. Again, it goes back to the site. I forgot to mention that in your selection of plants, do try to look for plants that are sprouters to remove, because the plants that don't sprout back, once you've cut them, then they're not coming back until the next fire, because they will regenerate from the seeds in the soil. So if they've already cut all of the non-sprouting plants, then all you've got left are sprouting plants to start with. So it's a shout out to how important it is to do it right the first time, and keep make those selections to begin with that in mind. But yeah, the clumps, if you wanted to let it regrow in a clumpy area, then that might be a solution. It is site specific. Yes, thank you.
In the chaparral zone, the top part talks about the first paragraph, the shrub shouldn't be allowed to grow 2.5 feet higher. But then A says all shrubs at 200 feet would be mowed or cut to ground level. What would be considered? Would that, you have to do a prescription that you showed of those manzanitas, where they rise them, raise the...
Yeah, I'd say that the cut all shrubs would be probably changed next time we do the fuel management standards. Okay, so I believe Christy has some of the next sections.
Thank you, Carol, very much.
Sure.
See if I can manage this little rascal in an appropriate way here. I think we're in the market for a new microphone, if anybody has any recommendations. First of all, thank you for the great questions and the conversation. I think this is exactly what we were hoping for. And this is that time when we've been sitting for a long time and it's gotten chilly because we had to turn that thing off so you could actually see the screen and hear us. But I'm going to move through this next material pretty quickly, and then we'll have lunch. And after lunch is the big treat. We'll all go out and actually see this in action with these experts pointing at the bushes and hearing your questions and talking about it. And I don't know if Lindsay mentioned it, but for those who are with us for the full day, she has some very nice certificates to send home with you of completion for this training. So we really value the commitment and the investment you're making in time. We're thrilled to have you, and we'll just keep on moving. So please do feel free to interrupt me, particularly for clarifying questions, if I'm saying something that does not make sense. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for you, sir. Would you guys ever consider doing a prescribed burn here?
Ah, what a wonderful question. Would we consider doing a prescribed burn? Well, since I don't have an hour to spend on this, the short answer is yes. We have burned here before. We intend to burn here again soon. And in preparation for that, not quite every member of the Conservancy team, but very close at this point, are all trained Type 2 firefighters so that we can support that effort. And that would only be done in close partnership, of course, with CAL FIRE and our regional fire district. But it's a very powerful tool, particularly in our wildland areas. So thanks for that question. I did want to reinforce something Carol just said, and I appreciate the question, Paula. We do hope that these standards will be used well beyond the preserve. Carol and her team have put their combined expertise of decades of work throughout the region into these standards, and they are solid standards. They've been reviewed by CAL FIRE and by our regional fire district and many others. They were kind of put to the test of the sober eyes, and we think they're really solid. So even if you don't have the ability to do the individual lot-specific plans for all your landowners, the standards themselves provide very good guidelines. So we're going to talk very quickly about best management practices, because as we all know, there can be real unfortunate unintended consequences of this kind of manipulation of the landscape. And what we've learned through doing since 2005 when we first got this is there are some practical tips that we could offer on implementation that will really reduce those unintended consequences. So just jumping right in, Weed management, we find is very beneficial, kind of self-reinforcing with fuel management if it's done right, but there can actually be a negative feedback loop if it's not done correctly. So we feel strongly, particularly here at the preserve, but elsewhere certainly, that annual invasive weed management in both the homelands and the open lands is a critical part of the fuel management process. It's built into all the fuel management plans. But as you've heard me mention, we also have open lands management plans that often go into greater detail on these weed management efforts. The invasive plants, many of the invasive plants that we have here increase fuels and fuel volume and ignition risk. And we are very concerned where we see poorly implemented fuel management, it's not uncommon to replace low volume, low ignition risk natives with high volume, high ignition risk invasives. So we really want to work with everybody to help avoid that kind of reaction. Those dense woody weeds in particular create very nasty ladder fuels, and you'll see French broom and thistle and in some cases hemlock coming in under the oaks. We really recommend, we talked about managing grass under the oaks, but even more so for oak health, and our good arborists can tell us more about this, but also for fuel management. If you have limited resources, focus on those woody ladder fuels under the oaks and those grassland areas is a real priority. We can help you do that, and a lot of times what you'll find is hand removal or very light touch like a handheld brush cutter is a better tool than trying to get in over the mower. Weeds, in fact, can be spread through mowing and mastication. And so this is something we're all just learning. It's not rocket science necessarily. As you run a mower through a high weed area, it will collect a lot of material on it, including weeds. If you then move to a lower weed area, some of those weeds will be deposited. If you're on very rough terrain, or if your blade is a little too low, you can bear up quite a lot of soil, and even relatively small patches of bare soil, if it happens to be thistle seed season or if you're carrying a lot of seeds with you, can turn into a very long-term maintenance nightmare for your landowner, for your conservation partners, and for the community. So we ask that please be thoughtful about that effect of moving seeds around through our equipment by cleaning tools and equipment between uses. If you take a look at a site, if you have a low weed section and a high weed section, mow the low weed section first, work your way in towards the higher weeds, and then clean that equipment before you move it. There are timing prescriptions that can really help for the mowing and for other weed management, reduce your unintended reseeding or stimulation of weed, existing weed banks, seed banks, excuse me. And again, let's try and avoid creating those large bare soil areas. And I think you did a wonderful job of making it clear that over pruning or thinning the canopy can also really aggravate weed issues. So I'm very quickly going to go through the 6 weeds that are of particular concern to us right now here on the preserve, and there are actually a couple more that are emerging, but for today I'm going to just make sure everybody here can take a moment to make sure that you're familiar with this particular nasty plant. French broom, also often referred to as genista. It's a dense shrub. It can grow in very dense stands. It looks a lot like a pea plant sometimes. If you go, I better not do that. Where's my little clicker? Sorry, guys. My little light. So you'll see these little seed pods on it. It is really actually very effective to hand remove this in the right seasons, and we have a couple of real weed warriors here among our preserve members, our landowners, who get out there with our teams and just hand pull this right around now is a real good time. What we find is if you cut it, and even mowing and spraying in repetition, we are not effectively managing that weed, but once you mow it, it will double or even triple the extent of the root mass and make it extremely difficult to pull in the future. So we recommend mowing only if you've already exhausted your other options. There are some chemical control options, and Jenna Allred, who's here today, is our weed expert from the Conservancy in the back, and she is really good at helping figure out how to handle these nasty critters. This one is another one that we have what we call a zero tolerance for this particular plant. It's called star thistle. If you've ever had the misfortune to walk through a stand of star thistle in thin pants or shorts, you will not have forgotten the experience. This is a vicious plant. When it takes over, it doesn't just eliminate recreational values of the land, it also eliminates a lot of wildlife. There's a fair number of our native wildlife that won't touch a stand of grasslands once this has really invaded it. And it is a serious problem for getting rid of it once you've got it. There's, again, hand control, and again, don't have to ask you to use much of an imagination to figure out how unpleasant that would be. Really there's our best option here is to make sure this stuff does not get established. If you see even one plant of this, if you call us, we will thank you profusely, and within 24 hours that plant will no longer exist. We are very rapid responders on this bugger. So please let us know if you spot that guy, and please vigorously remove him if you do. The others are more of a problem. The others I'm going to mention now are more of a problem because they grow in such dense stands, and because they can create a lot of fire fuel and kind of move fire, the rate of spread through the communities much more quickly, and they displace valuable natural habitat. It's the black mustard. I'm sure you've seen this stuff out there. It can get 6 feet tall. It leaves a lot of dry standing biomass, nasty stuff. And then there are several other thistles that I'll just quickly hit. Bull thistle, which I'm sure you guys have discovered. One of the things that I find interesting about both the Genessa and this one is it's not uncommon to have a landowner ask you to leave it. They're actually kind of pretty in a lot of people's eyes. And we would ask that you politely decline that request and go ahead and manage these weeds. And if you have a little bit of pressure on that coming to you, you're welcome to call us and we'll have a conversation about it. The Italian thistle can look very similar. It's taller, it's more slender. It's particularly comes into the woodlands as ladder fuel. It can be very large, dense stands. This one, all of these, you really want to get them before they bolt and absolutely before they set seed. These three, including milk thistle here, as you can see from the picture on the lower right, they have the distinguishing characteristic of creating huge numbers of seeds, which are very downy and fluffy, and they travel for miles. And it's one of the reasons, the fact that we've got so much of these three thistles in particular on the preserve is one of the reasons we're so concerned about creating bare soil on the preserve. Because you may not realize that there's thistle a mile upwind of you, but I guarantee the first time the breeze picks up when these are setting seed, you're going to have a ton of thistle downlanding in those bare areas. And I understand that may sound in conflict with the bare zones in the non-combustible area. We wrestle with that all the time. That's one of the reasons we like the bare soil to stay in the non-combustible area and outside of that area, really try and limit it. I was very concerned when Forrest earlier today said this new insurance gentleman had come out, the inspector come out and said they want non-combustible to 30 feet. So that's a new thing. That's not a good thing. We're going to need to work on that. But bare dirt is not your friend when it comes to the seed bank that it creates for these guys. We talked a little bit about treatment timing mattering so much. Your fuel management plans, and if there is one, the open lands management plan, will focus on timing. We will help you with this. There's some great expertise in this room, I know. If you are learning things about timing that you think we need to know, please let us know, because this is all stuff that people are really just starting to get their heads wrapped around on how much more effective some of these treatments are at certain times of the year than others. But the mowing in particular is one that is pretty site-specific and season-specific, as David Simpson here mentioned. Timing is going to depend a lot on what kind of a rain year it was, how hot the spring is, what's happening in the conditions on the ground. It's all comes down to seasonal timing, and also your resources that are present and your goals for the site. And so we are here to help on that. If you feel like you're not quite sure when is the right time to mow, join the crowd, right? That's where we all are. It's very site and condition specific, but it matters. So let us work with you on that. Let's see. I think I probably covered everything else on So let's talk for a minute about snags, logs, and hazard trees. This is an area that's fraught with questions and concerns and lots of different opinions and ideas. But here on the preserve, the standing dead trees, which we also call snags, right? You've seen them out there. We actually have a fair number of them, which is a great thing. They are critical for ecological processes. And in forests and other places in the state and in the country where the foresters and the conservationists go through these forests, if there aren't enough snags in a forest, they start killing perfectly healthy trees to create snags. That's how important they are. Here in our geography, many of these snags, particularly oak and redwood snags, will last for decades standing, and they provide essential habitat for anything from our acorn woodpeckers, our native pollinators, lots of beneficial animals, and owls, raptors, and help us manage rodent populations. It's all interrelated, and a lot of times it's the snag that's the missing link in systems that start to come apart. That said, from a fuel management perspective, it's dead wood, right? And the odds of wanting to have that right up against your house are low. And I see I have a question here.
After a tree dies, how long does it typically stay standing until it becomes a hazard?
So the question is, after a tree dies, how long does it stay standing until it could become a hazard? Did I get it?
Yeah.
And it really depends a lot on the type of the tree. So tan oaks, which we see dying in large numbers on our western slopes because of sudden oak death, they will not hold their form very long at all, and they will crumble and fall often within just a few years. And bay trees likewise don't hold a very strong snag, so to speak. Whereas some of the redwood snags that we have are probably 50 plus years old and incredibly valuable for habitat perspective. And the oaks, particularly the deciduous oaks, like valley oaks that die, can many times stand for a very long time. It can be difficult to detect a hazard tree. And sometimes we ask an arborist or an expert to come out and look at it for us. If it's a dead tree and it's within its height distance of a structure or a driveway or a road, and we have any reason to believe it's a concern, or if the concern is raised by the landowner, we'll have somebody come out and take a look at it. Public safety always trumps. But you will see as you drive around the preserve, there are some magnificent snags that are very close to roads, that are acorn woodpecker granaries and nesting trees, and that have all kinds of other value that the community has collectively chosen to keep, partly because of their aesthetic value and partly because of that ecological benefit. So unless it's going to fall and land on something we really care about, we hope that you'll choose to keep it. Access and egress, though, of course, from a fuel management standpoint, always a top priority. So this is another place to look again at that 8-inch diameter for downed wood. Now there can be a lot of confusion on this point. We talk about 8-inch diameter for dead or downed wood. 3-inch diameter for living healthy wood is what can be retained within that fuel management zone. So it's two different numbers. Sorry to be complicated about it, but that difference makes a huge difference how much material we're able to keep. Poison oak. So we learned a little while ago, and then it always helps me to relearn it, that if it's greasy or it's smelly, it's gotta go, right? These guys definitely check the box of greasy. They carry a ton of oil. They burn nicely. Luckily, it's low volume typically. But when you get those large, dense, old patches of poison oak, Mr. Latta back here is just showing me some just heroic work he did hand pulling poison oak in these dense clumps. It can really be a problem. So in the homeland, you can clear your poison oak or your client's poison oak without any concern by us. Although I will mention that if you're going to do it using chemical means with spray, you can do a lot of collateral damage if you don't get the timing right, and your fuel management plan will talk about the timing. By collateral damage, I mean you can kill a lot of things you meant to keep by spraying the oak at the wrong time of year. Beyond 30 feet, and so it's the okay to room in the homeland. In the open lands, if it's within 30, if it's in your 30-foot zone, don't even have. I mean, it's going to be in the fuel management plan, but have at it. Knock yourself out. Beyond 30 feet in the open lands, there is a request that you have, or there's a need to have an approval, either through the fuel management plan or an open lands management plan. In many cases, that's really dependent on the type of habitat. If it's providing ladder fuel under your oaks, the answer is going to be yes, but let us take a look at it with you and make sure that we're getting the timing and the process right. And part of that is for your safety. Most of it's for making sure that there's unintended consequences of the removal. Getting into these areas where the removal is desired with mechanical equipment or spray in the wrong time or in the wrong way, we do a lot of collateral damage to your soils and to your native habitat. So that's why we want to be consulted. So native vegetation, of course, we love to retain all of our best and most valuable native vegetation everywhere we can. It is what makes the preserve so iconic. The owners care very much about the native vegetation. We're far more likely to get a phone call, at least my phone will ring, because people are concerned about how much vegetation has been removed than somebody's lack of vegetation. So it's, to Michael's point, sometimes people are concerned about whether field management is actually being conducted. Give us a ring, we'll help figure that out. What looks like well-managed field to one set of eyes might not to another, so sometimes it's just a conversation that needs to happen. But we ask people to err on the side of retaining the native vegetation, but consistent with your field management plan. Yes?
I'm going back to the poison oak question.
Okay.
I don't know what you're seeing here in Santa Lucia. We think at Point Lobos, what we're seeing is poison oak is invading areas that have been disturbed, and it's growing with much, much greater density than some people think is normal. And I assume that's a great fire hazard, and I wondered if you were also finding that here and how you were dealing with it.
So we do see a couple things. I would say generally yes. So one is most of our landscape would have burned. When the Native Americans here, it would have been every 3 to 5 years. In the woodlands and the grasslands, it might have been every year. And fire will knock this stuff back really effectively. To the question about prescribed burning, that's one benefit of prescribed burning. You do have safety concerns associated with burning poison oak. You have to be really mindful of. But it also is very quick to react to disturbance. So in that unfortunate kind of counterproductive effort, it's not uncommon for us to see equipment go out into oaklands to get after one little patch that you might have been able to take out by hand with just a little bit of extra personal equipment to protect that person. But by having taken that piece of equipment out and disturbed a whole bunch of ground around it, a couple of years later, you've got a 5 times the size patch of poison oak, because it does react very effectively, or vigorously to that kind of disturbance. And that's, again, why we really like to be consulted and work with you. We probably have exactly the same goal. Yeah, let's get that out of there, but let's do it in smart. Did I hit everything there? There's a point. Careless Plans always make this point, but I want to touch on it briefly because it may not be entirely obvious, especially in coastal sage scrub or in the maritime chaparral. Those plans are going to give you some options. So it's going to say, go to this area, pick your winners, and then remove the rest. And you've got quite a bit of latitude on, okay, you need to remove 30% or 50% sometimes even of the volume or the numbers of plants. And it's up to you to pick them. Carol made the point, if there's chamise there, take that out first. Right? The chamise should always go. Number one, we're not going to run out of it anytime soon. We've got some fabulous chamise stands out in the wildlands, and we're good with that. But what you'll find, especially if you have the opportunity to go look at it in the spring, or if you bring your great plant ecologists out with you, the diversity, the biodiversity in our coastal scrub and maritime chaparral is off the charts. We've got incredibly diverse, fabulous plants. And when you have to pick which ones to leave and which ones to take, try to maintain some of each of those things. There are going to be some that you're just going to automatically love. Most of the time people leave their fuchsia flowered gooseberries, for example. Those guys just stay. There's some that they're just going to say, yeah, I want those. And I want most of my manzanita because they're pretty. But then as you're picking out the other ones, you may see shrubs that you don't even know what that is. Keep that one. if it's rare enough, it's like the only one you see in the area, you don't actually have to know what it is. If it's not one of our invasives and you've got materials here to do that, just keep those guys. Try and mix it up, keep as much of the diversity as you can for us. Some of these plants are actually quite rare, even if they're not listed. Okay, so here's a little bit of fun. If you do find yourself having created bare dirt, whether on purpose or not, We have been pioneering here, or like we're really kind of just testing our methodologies. And here you see Dr. Sierra Corona here and his able peer and colleague Jenna on this, if I can make it work. What you want to do is you want to avoid that bare soil and treat it once it happens, if it's not in the non-combustible zone. In the open lands, we do require that you treat it if it's more than 15 square feet, which is not a very big area. And we do have a conservancy-approved seed mix for those areas in the open lands in particular. We really do ask that you get in touch with us. Think ahead. If you think you're going to have bare patches, let's order that stuff for you early. Timing on the seeding matters. If you seed at the wrong time of year, you're just making a few birds really happy. So let's not do that because the stuff's expensive. And rice straw can be something you use in the interim, sterile rice straw before you get the seed down. So let's see if this will work for us. So you go ahead and clear off, just very shallow, but clear off the existing vegetation. Throw down some potting soil, break it in, some nice seeds, break it in, and call it good. Piece of cake.
Where's the funding for the seed mix come from?
So the owners in the residential properties, the owners will purchase the seed blend. They're typically happy to do it. We've worked some of our native wildflower seeds into the mix. And so we have members often will come and do a small area like this, and then the next year they'll come back and ask for quite a bit more. But there can be some sticker shock on the seed prices on these things. And so it's a good idea to have that conversation early and make sure you don't plant it and then bill them, or there might be some blowback.
And to that end, you can see in this image that there's two patches. They're both fairly small. So that's what we're going for. Small patches of seeded area so that the seeds will naturally disperse. It actually saves the landowners a lot of money on buying seeds year after year as these plants come up. It'll spread further.
Right. And this particular section here is in open lands of one of our really a weed champion landowner who had hand cleared, God, what is it, 10 acres or something of used to be solid brome and is now incredible coastal prairie over a period of something like 10 years. He's still on his knees on that meadow, daily in the spring doing hand weeding. He's amazing. And he wanted to use our seed mix to bring in some additional diversity and was reluctant to bear up the dirt. And I'll be honest, I was too. When Rodriguez said, yeah, we're going to go in there and bear that up and put some seed down, I'm like, well, really? Are you sure about that? And so Rich Griffith did some seeding on his own without disturbing the ground, just kind of punched it in or kind of raked it in, but without removing that material. And then Jenna and Rodrigo came back and did this in several locations, and they flagged it so they go back and look. The next year, Rich Griffith was like, let's do the whole thing. The reaction or the response of the native seed to this just relatively low stimulation was tremendously higher than it was otherwise. And what Lindsay is talking about is if your landowners ask to turn some of your more rural grasslands back into coastal prairie or back into natives, that's where those kind of patchwork comes in particular. So vegetation disposal is another best practice that we really are hoping that you'll give us your thoughtful attention to when you're out in the field. One of the most common concerns that I find when an owner asks me to come out and take a walk around with them is somewhere in the back of the property, almost always off the slope somewhere, kind of hidden from immediate view, will be the landscaper's boneyard, and it's where a lot of landscaping material gets thrown. Not uncommonly, all the really beautifully hand-picked weeds or well-managed weeds get chucked into a pile back down in the open lands of back slope, and you see this nice ring of weeds kind of spreading out from that compost pile or the old pile. That kind of activity, if there's composting actually happening, it needs to happen in the homeland for a couple of reasons. One is the open lands are the wildlands, so it shouldn't be used for that. But another is you really need, if you're going to be composting, it needs to be managed, right? You need to be turning it, and you need to get enough heat in it to actually kill the seeds. So composting is a thing, right? It's not just throwing stuff on the ground and hoping it rots. Where it's woody material, like tree trimmings and shrubs that aren't seed laden, you can mulch and spread lightly, and again subject to the plan. We often ask to be removed from the property and properly disposed of. When you're masticating the shrub areas, unless it's expressly stated otherwise, you can usually just leave that mastication material in there. You just kind of put it down to 2 feet, or kind of give it a haircut, and that usually works out. If there's a lot of dead material in there, the field management plan may specifically ask that you remove it. We've talked a lot about leaf litter and the weeds. An awful lot of the weeds that we have, that we hand pull with the Conservancy, we pack them up in contractors' bags, we take them back to the office, we dry them out, burn them. Or we just don't want to spread this stuff around. So if you're not quite sure what to do with it, take it to the landfill, sadly. They have pretty vigorous weed management protocols at landfills. If there are still some, and I didn't talk about some of the really bad weeds, other zero tolerance weeds are in your thing there. Detrichia is one, it's also called stinkboard. You can actually call and ask the Conservancy how to manage that weed waste if you'd like to, and we'll give you recommendations. The star thistle would be another good one. Please don't pull star thistle that's starting to set seed, throw it on the top of your truck and drive out of the preserve with it. Rather actually have it stay home than that. So we're happy to be helpful to you and figure out how to handle this material. But please consider, in many cases, the weed material that you're pulling out is very problematic and can really turn into a huge nightmare for us if it's not managed well. So thank you for indulging me on that. So last bit, and I think we're almost getting to lunchtime, which would be awesome, because I don't know about you guys, but I'm starting to get hungry. We'll also turn the heater on during lunch and warm the place back up. But special considerations for sensitive resources. That's chemise, by the way, on the left right there, in case you're curious what it looks like when it's in full bloom. As pretty as that is, I've never had a landowner ask if they can keep their chemise. But the maritime chaparral, where it does live, is incredibly rare and valuable habitat. So the field management plans will address that. Our little tiger salamanders and some of the other really special critters that we have, they're hard to find. They are often seasonal. These particular little rascals are mostly in the grasslands all summer in a burrow somewhere. You won't see them. But if you get out with your mechanical equipment in the open lands too early and there's still some spring in the soil, you can crush them in the burrows. That's one of the reasons that we work on timing on things like mowing and equipment moving. And then we have our riparian areas. And there's no pruning in riparian areas. I need to tune that up a little bit. You can prune, you just have to, you can't do mechanical work. So specific to our riparian areas, and I think, is everybody familiar with riparian? It's basically the areas around seasonal and year-round water in creeks. And it can be a huge range. It can go from redwood forest like this one down to the scruffiest looking willow patches you might have ever put your eyes on. But it's all pretty spectacularly important for wildlife. Riparian vegetation has a higher moisture content. And so Carol's always been very reassuring to us on the lots that have riparian habitat. And in fact, in the Soberanes fire, it was the riparian habitat of the Santa Creek that formed much of the terminus of the burning. And in many cases, the firefighters actually used the riparian vegetation, at their back as a starting point to do the direct, sometimes called backfiring, but the fire operations off of it. Oops. So field management treatments in this area need to utilize hand crews. That's the biggest difference and focus on removing weeds and dead material in order to preserve that fuel moisture content and preserve the fire benefits of this. If we go in and just clear riparian, you're actually damaging the site. What will come back is going to be weeds. It won't be that high moisture content stuff, and you'll go backwards. So the field management, if you have a riparian area in your field management areas, it'll call out as a special zone, I believe, or it'll just be built in. Yes, okay. And it's really hand work. It's the one place where we really don't mind if you leave some ladder fuel, if that's what it takes to maintain shade on the water and maintain the integrity of the habitat. It'll be closely managed or guided by a field management plan. Living trees and shrubs cannot be removed or heavily pruned, pruned beyond the dead material, except if you've been specifically asked to do it by the plan or by your person there. And again, the standing snags or down logs greater than 8 inches of diameter, if you want to take those out, you need to talk to us first, please. Did you want to add anything? All good? Questions? And then wetlands. We have a stunning number of wetlands on the preserve. We have in certainly more than, I think it's more than 35 that have actual ponds around them. But in terms of protected wetlands on the property, it's in the hundreds. So if there is a wetland, most of them are identified and protected through additional layers of conservation easement by the county back in the day. If you have wetlands, it's going to pop up on your fuel management plan. It's also going to pop up in your open lands plan if you have one of those. And the main thing with these wetlands, although wetlands come in lots of different sizes, shapes, and some of them are seasonal and kind of hard to see in certain times of year. But one of the biggest concerns that we have there is not changing the hydrology of the wetlands, so you're not changing how the water moves across the landscape. We don't want to compact the soils. So for the fuel management of the wetlands, a lot of it's about timing and what kind of equipment we use there. And we're all very happy to help with that. So, you made it, I think, unless Lindsay tells me I'm wrong. It's lunch after questions, but I'm happy to entertain questions as long as you've got. Yes, ma'am.
So, Christy, I'm interested in how our different ecosystems can be used as a design element as we do site planning and master planning for properties.
Right.
Are there ways that we can utilize the properties of a seasonal wetland or a riparian area and create new ones where appropriate? I mean, not trying to, create a riparian where it doesn't exist, but
Right.
we have drainage structures, we've got dissipation trenches, we've got areas that are rain gardens or things like that. And, would the Conservancy be willing to work with landscape architects and designers to use some of these natural properties that exist in these unique scenarios that have higher moisture plants to be part of an integrated, well thought out, not just ornamental landscape, but a functional landscape that might help in both habitat, fire suppression?
What a wonderful question. So to summarize that, the question was, are there opportunities to use these naturally occurring plants and features that may be proximate to the residential area of a lot? Will the Conservancy work with landscape architects in the development of a site plan and a landscape plan to maybe bring some of those features into the planning process to take advantage of their fire-resistant or resilient natures? Did I do that? Yes, we're thrilled to do that. We've done that in the past when invited, but a new thing that's happening now that I think is really going to help with that whole process is it used to be, until very recently, unfortunately, just one of those things, that the house would be designed and built before Carol Rice and her team ever saw it, right? We would do the fuel management as almost the last thing. Kind of made sense because you think, well, the fuel management's going to depend on whether it's wood or stucco siding and this and that and the other. And what we realized more recently since the Sobranes fire is we need our design teams to be informed by the understanding that Carol and her team and others, the qualified consultants can bring, because it will affect design. And it can be self-reinforcing in a very positive way. And so, yes, we have seen people bring, especially in the fuel management, it might say you need to take out 30% of these fuchsia flowering gooseberries because they're just too thick, in here. Dig them up and bring them in, maybe. And if that's the right plant, that's the one you want. We do see small water features coming into homelands. I think the balance there is whether there's enough water availability in the plan. I love the idea of creating use of water gardens and drainage structures in the non-combustible zone. So historically, those get pushed way out, sometimes even into the open lands because people don't want to look at them. Maybe we can design to bring those in close, and so that rock feature that's actually managing drainage for you is also part of your fuel management. So it's a wonderful approach, and we are hoping that all of the teams will be doing that. Jenny McAdams is here, who's the coordinator for the Design Review Board, and she's awesome. Is she still here? She is. Yes. And she will help you, I think, connect the dots and bring us in when you're ready. One change, though, that might be a surprise to some of you is that the Conservancy is no longer an active, we no longer hold a seat on the Design Review Board. So when we're present in the design review meetings, typically it's by invitation. So if you think that there's something about your site that would make it helpful for us to be there, we're happy to be there. And Jenny's really good at teasing those out and saying, come on down for this one or that one. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
How did the field management standards address proposals for green roofs?
For what was the last one?
Green roofs.
Green roofs, thank you. So how do the field management standards address proposal for green roofs? That's a Carol question.
Okay.
Thank you for that question.
So far, we haven't had one. But if we were to have one, it would be an exception probably to the field management standards, and it would be called out because it would require special treatment. A field management, a grass roof or a green roof is actually considered a Class A assembly. So, and that's because the Class A test is for burn through. And in a green roof, you've got the vegetation and a whole bunch of dirt and a plastic film and a barrier, so that will prevent burn through of embers. It will, the burn through test is probably not a good test for how does it function in a fire spread scenario, because it certainly will spread fire if you don't, and you probably won't have it green all the entire time. So yeah, it probably would spread fire. And so you'd have to have some special attention to it. Probably extra moisture, which may not make it work real well. So yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. Oh, well, we'd have to have a very little bit of moisture very frequently, so that would limit the spread. But yeah, it's and going back to Forrest Arthur's comment, I don't think the insurers would look upon that kindly. You know, the inspector that he went out with, he said, you know, any combustible roof, and that sod roof is combustible, even though it is a Class A roof assembly.
Thank you, Carol. We actually do have some sod roofs and some green roofs on the preserve from early iterations, and we're going to be interested to see how that's handled by the insurance. One thing I forgot to mention as we were going through, there were a couple of the slides, the great slides that Carol and her team brought, that where a particular weed popped up that's a brand new weed for the preserve that we're particularly concerned about. It's called Mexican feathergrass. It's a Nacella. It's almost given away for free in a bunch of the nurseries right now because it propagates so incredibly rapidly. And it is starting to really take over in Carmel Valley Village and other places where it's relatively recently been introduced. And it is a zero tolerance plant on the preserve. We are seeing it pop up. We think it's just a weed spread off of vehicles. And if you can, that's another one that if you see it, pull it, please. But also let us know, because it's an area that we will need to monitor. It is a very vigorous reproducing plant. And if even one plant sets seed once, we're going to have to watch that spot for 5 years. Kind of thing.
That Stipa tenuissima is changed in Nacella? Is that what you're saying?
That's what I looked at. I think it might be listed more than one way. I look at the nursery, when you look at the nursery listings, that's how they run it. But what do you know it has?
Stipa tenuissima.
Stipa tenuissima. That's the next
Mexican
one.
feathergrass, right? I haven't heard it called Nacella before.
Last night when I looked it up to see if I could get it right, the first two websites I looked at called it out as a Nacella. But I am absolutely not a botanist. So anyway, I just noticed it cropping up in a couple of the photographs and just as a weed in the side views of the images. I'm like, oh, I have to get those lot numbers and get out there after it. So please help us out with that one as well. Are there any other questions?
Have you noticed or have been studying on the biotic value and for the animals before and after? Or like where I live again, where people are taking it out wholesale. Should I personally be concerned about such things that, oh my gosh, we're losing all this habitat or not?
That's a great question. So the question is there any research or studies done on the quantifying, if I'm using that word, as the benefits to wildlife Because, and is there a concern, or should we be concerned about the cumulative impacts of fuel management done maybe in different ways in this more broad scale, kind of the scorched earth approach to fuel management, so to speak? Are we worried about cumulative impacts? So I'm not aware of any specific research on that. And I'm looking back to you guys. Christy, is there specific research on that?
Not specifically targeted around homes, but the one that comes to mind is the mastication versus burning chaparral study.
Great.
Which had a significant difference in birds as the vegetation recovered. The burned chaparral had twice as many birds using it as masticated. So there are going to be some responses in the wildlife depending on the structure and the quality of the habitat. What we have seen around here is with some of the wildlife cameras that people have around their homes, is that the wildlife uses these mosaic patchy fuel management areas that you guys have been hearing about with great abundance. They really enjoy it. It creates a lot of habitat for hunting and for cover and for breeding.
Great, thank you. And to summarize that answer for people who couldn't hear it, while we don't have any research here, there was research done on the difference between managing maritime chaparral through mastication versus prescribed fire. And in the recovery phase, the chaparral that was managed by fire had a much higher bird abundance and use than the masticated zone. I've at least heard anecdotally that even masticating though is much better, obviously, than dozing it to the ground and trying to convert to another habitat type potentially, which tends to be very problematic and can lead to long-term just weed management issues. You're trying to drive the system to a condition it can't support. But Paola, to answer your question, I am deeply, personally, as an ecologist and as a conservation practitioner, concerned about the cumulative effects of fuel management in our exurban and rural communities. And the other answer that Dr. Christie gave is we actually have a very extensive wildlife camera network here on the preserve, in which we are specifically looking at wildlife use of wildlands and the open lands proximate to homes, including and in homelands where this management is happening. We're seeing very vigorous wildlife use across the board, good species richness in these managed areas. So we do believe if you manage according to these standards, maintaining as much of these natives as you can and just doing the patchwork effect, that you're continuing to support great wildlife. Your wildlife use might change a little, but we think it continues to be high value. And that's consistent with, and I see another comment coming, but it's consistent with the idea that your best biodiversity comes in areas that have mosaics and edge effects and lots of native diversity and species richness in your plant communities. That's what reflects in your wildlife communities, and this is very supportive of those principles. And I see Kathy has a...
I just wanted to comment that you got to remember the intent of fuels management. And the intent of fuels management in protecting a more destructive outcome if you don't have fuels management. And there have been scores of studies on that, on the effectiveness of fuels management treatments in a whole variety of fuel types and how effective they are at helping us control wildfires. And that's where you're going to get your most destruction. So you have to keep in mind that the whole reason we're doing these fuel management treatments is to prevent a worse outcome. So there's always that balance. We're always looking at trying to meet, all those things, as we talked about at the very beginning of this session, that all of these components of biodiverse landscape are important. But fuels treatment is one of those components.
Totally agree.
I think that's a really important point. And the other thing that this really helps us do, if we can manage through this fuel management, we can reduce the frequency of catastrophic wildfire. What the Sobrani's taught us is the areas that burn are generally doing very well. It's the areas that the bulldozers had to go through to prevent, to do the fire suppression access and activities where we're really seeing the damage. And so one of the things I'm so excited about here on the preserve is through this very vigorous process of ensuring great access everywhere, with the trees being limbed up to 15 feet and the driveways being cleared and the roads having this good fuel management approach. There's just less need for that kind of very destructive both fire but also fire suppression activity. And so, we are very strongly in support of fuel management What we're finding here is by making what are relatively small changes to how we do it, we can really promote a much better outcome for everybody. Yes, ma'am.
Christy, I asked this, I think, about a year ago at CCLT, but what do you do about human management? So any prohibited activities or discouraged activities, so maybe recreation is
Yeah.
here after 1 p.m. Is there anything that the preserve provides to reduce the risk of ignition in this habitat?
Thank you for that question. So the question was, what kind of guidance do we provide to reduce the odds of human-sourced ignitions, especially in the process of doing this fuel management? And the fuel management plans, and I think very importantly, the Community Services District and others on the preserve are very sensitive to the idea that we do not want to run equipment after, typically in the hot days, I think it's 10 in the morning, but as a blanket and,
30% humidity.
it's 30% humidity for sure, but if you don't know, don't run it, right? if it's not cool and moist out, we do worry, especially about people deciding to do that little extra mowing. Michael, you asked a little bit about what if you get out on the site, you see that the fuel management wasn't really done well enough, or it feels like there's more to do. Sometimes when we see problems really crop up, it's that spontaneous, I think we should just take that back another 5 feet, and you're not necessarily looking at the plan, and you're not necessarily thinking about the weather conditions. And sometimes that's a landowner initiated process, and then we get, we have had fires start specifically on the preserve from fuel management. And so yes, there's a series of recommendations on that 30% humidity cutoff, making sure that the people who are doing the work are really qualified to do the work is the big one. That's one of the reasons we're so thrilled you guys are all here. We would consider you to be some of our best ambassadors and implementers. There are, for lots of different safety reasons, really good reasons to make sure that the owners are able to connect with and utilize really competent, well-trained contractors, which is really our best line of business.
So related to that question, how does Santa Lucia deal with early detection, either fires within your domain or adjacent to you that would affect you?
Yeah, so we're really blessed here to have the Community Services District, and David Simpson over here with his team are very often the first responders, and they're the first ones on site. When we had a fire come up last summer for spring from a faulty piece of spa equipment, I think is what did it. It took you less than 10 minutes to get there, and it was the fact that David got there so fast that it prevented that from turning into a thing. Yeah, something we'd all probably still be talking about. But it's eyes and ears on the ground. It's people being pretty well trained. We have a one-call system here where we all go through safety training on what to do if you see smoke, or call it in first and ask a question later, kind of a team here. But it's all of us. I started out by saying this is one community, and you guys are all a part of it. And it's very often that it's a contractor who calls up and says, I'm a little concerned about what I see happening on that lot over there. I see somebody on a mower, maybe even they're just driving out, or it could be a landscape architect or somebody who's just familiar enough with the preserve to know that something that they see doesn't look quite right. And we're very sensitive, whether it's David or Forrest or myself or whoever can get to that site first. Like, hey, can we talk about this for a minute? We're not going to say, oh, so-and-so told us you were doing, we're very protective of our relationships, because it comes down to it, this community is going to be best protected if we're all working together as a team. So thanks for that question. We're also always happy to hear what you think we're doing not enough of, or what we might be doing wrong. We're very open to learning from what we're doing and getting better and growing as a group. So we really appreciate it. If you've heard something that didn't sound quite right today, but you weren't really necessarily going to raise your hand, pull any one of us aside during lunch or on the walk and say, that didn't sit with me right. I'm not sure you meant what you said, or I'm not sure I agree with what I heard. We really value that kind of feedback. I promise we won't jump down your throats. One more, and then we'll break for lunch.
I have a really quick non-related wildlife question.
Okay.
With all your cameras, do you see wildlife corridors? Do you know where the mountain lions are moving through the preserve?
Ooh, what a wonderful question. So the question is, did our wildlife cameras help us understand the wildlife corridors across the property, and do we know where the mountain lions are?
So it's like it's on like
Yes.
while you're flying along, like.
So throughout California, but particularly in any of the kind of rural and ex-urban areas of California, we're no exception. There are lions pretty much any place where there's habitat that could support lions. And our wildlife cameras have supported that belief and demonstrated it to be true. So we know that we have a healthy population of lions here, just as most of the communities do. I have a little cottage in the city of Half Moon Bay, and the wildlife cameras catch mountain lions walking down Main Street from time to time. So they're here with us, and we've got living with wildlife materials on our website. They're available that we can provide anytime. It's not so much are they here or not, but how do we manage our own behavior in ways that keep us safe. And so, yes. There was a question that was asked earlier about what else doesn't happen in the open lands and wildlands that keeps us safe, and one of the big things is off-road vehicles. There are a number of requirements within just broadly the community and the decisions we've made that keep us safe. And what made me think of that is loose pets are a real attractive for mountain lions, and we don't have loose pets, either people keep their animals close. So a lot of these are positively reinforcing, and they serve lots of different benefits. We are done for now. If you have more questions, grab us during lunch.